Breaking news spread like wildfire when Pastor Creflo, one of America's most well-known and widely debated religious leaders, was suddenly rushed to the hospital after a frightening health scare. The news sent shockwaves through his family, followers, and the broader church community. Only days before, Pastor Dollar had appeared vibrant, preaching with his usual intensity, and moving with the energy that had become his hallmark. His presence on stage had long been larger than life, captivating thousands in Atlanta, millions on television, and countless others online across the globe. Yet in a single unexpected moment, destiny took an unforeseen turn, leaving everyone asking the same urgent question. What had really happened behind closed doors? Pastor Dollar was not an ordinary pastor. For decades, he had led World Changers Church International, a ministry known not only for its massive congregational reach, but also for its influential media presence and global impact. He was an icon in the prosperity gospel movement, renowned for his motivational sermons, his emphasis on financial empowerment, and his ability to communicate messages of hope and abundance. His energy and charisma had made him a fixture on television screens, in conference halls, and across social media platforms. Yet with fame came scrutiny. Critics often debated his teachings, lifestyle, and public persona. Now, as the news of his health crisis spread, the public was forced to confront a new image of the man who had always represented strength, resilience, and authority. Vulnerable and in need of prayers himself. The moment it happened. According to reports, the incident occurred during a private family gathering. Pastor Dollar, surrounded by loved ones, suddenly began experiencing chest discomfort and dizziness. Family members immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation. Panic set in as they rushed to his side, making urgent calls to emergency services. Witnesses later described the scene as chaotic, filled with frantic prayers, tears, and the unmistakable tension of a life hanging in the balance. Within minutes, paramedics arrived, carefully stabilizing him before rushing him to the hospital. While the event itself was terrifying, insiders suggested that this was not entirely unforeseen. Observers familiar with Pastor Dollar's ministry recalled subtle warning signs in the weeks leading up to the crisis. In some sermons, his energy seemed diminished, his voice occasionally lacked its usual vigor, and he appeared fatigued, sometimes short of breath. Like many leaders in high-pressure positions, he continued to push forward, hiding physical exhaustion behind a facade of strength and spiritual authority. The explosion of public attention. The moment news of Pastor Dollar's hospitalization broke, social media erupted. Hashtags like #PrayForCreflo began trending nationwide within hours, accompanied by an outpouring of prayers, messages of support, and personal testimonies of how he had impacted lives. Congregants, fans, and fellow ministers expressed their concern and shock. Simultaneously, critics revisited long-standing debates about the physical and emotional toll of leading a megachurch and the potential hazards of the prosperity gospel lifestyle. What made the story particularly compelling was the stark contrast between Pastor Dollar's previously unshakable public image and the vulnerability now on display. A man whose life had been defined by strength, now fighting for his own health. Inside the hospital, the moment Pastor Creflo arrived at the hospital, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. What had begun as a private family emergency quickly transformed into a tense, almost surreal scene, where faith, fear, and hope collided in the sterile environment of the emergency room. The usual hum of hospital activity, the rhythmic beeping of machines, the soft footsteps of nurses, the distant calls over walkie-talkies was overshadowed by a palpable energy of worry and anticipation. Everyone present seemed to sense that this was not just a routine health scare. It was a moment charged with gravity, one that carried consequences far beyond the walls of the hospital. By his side, as steadfast as ever, was Pastor Taffy Dollar. She held his hand with unwavering determination, her eyes a mixture of fear, resolve, and prayerful focus. Every so often, she leaned closer to murmur words of encouragement, quietly reminding him to stay strong, to trust God, and to fight for the life that had touched millions. Between these soft reassurances came occasional bursts of tears, quickly wiped away, a testament to the emotional roller coaster of watching a loved one who had inspired and led thousands, suddenly rendered vulnerable. Her presence was both a comfort to Pastor Dollar and a steadying force for the family, who had quickly gathered from various states, leaving behind commitments, flights, and routines to be at his side. The family waiting room became a crucible of emotion, where anxiety and hope mingled in almost tangible waves. Relatives whispered prayers under their breath, clasping hands, bowing heads, and sometimes weeping quietly into tissues. Friends and close associates offered words of reassurance, but even their voices carried the tension that filled the room. The gravity of the situation was reflected in every movement, the subtle pacing, the quiet conversations held in hushed tones, the repeated checking of cell phones for updates from doctors. Even those who were normally composed seemed fragile, weighed down by the realization that the man who had always preached resilience now relied entirely on the faith, skill, and care of others. Hospital staff moved with brisk professionalism, yet there was an underlying recognition of the uniqueness of the patient in the bed. Pastors and prominent figures are accustomed to being in control, guiding others, and providing comfort. Here, however, Pastor Dollar was removed from his familiar arena. The monitors, intravenous lines, and medical equipment now dictated the rhythm of his life. Doctors and nurses communicated efficiently, providing updates in measured tones, but every statement, every pause, seemed to stretch time for the family, intensifying the uncertainty of each passing moment. Even for seasoned church leaders and public figures present, the scene was humbling. The transition from the commanding presence on the pulpit to the fragility of a hospital bed underscored the human reality of a man who, for decades, had projected strength, hope, and spiritual authority. Witnessing him reliant on machines, on medications, and on the prayers of others created a powerful juxtaposition, a reminder that leadership, influence, and spiritual guidance do not make one invincible. As hours passed, the waiting room became a center of both solidarity and tension. Family members huddled together, offering comfort while silently wrestling with fears about what the next updates might reveal. Occasionally, updates from doctors filtered through, measured, cautious, precise. But each small improvement, each brief sign of awareness from Pastor Dollar, was met with collective sighs of relief and whispered prayers of gratitude. The room seemed suspended between hope and dread, with every heartbeat echoing the fragility and unpredictability of life itself. In that space, the congregation, the larger church community, and the broader public felt the ripple effects of the crisis. Calls, messages, and social media posts poured in, bringing words of encouragement and prayers from across the country. Yet for those physically present, it was an intimate, almost sacred moment of raw vulnerability. They were witnesses not to a sermon, not to a message of prosperity or guidance, but to the simple truth that even the strongest among us rely on others in our most critical moments. Inside the hospital, the stakes were undeniable. Every movement, every whispered word, Every prayer carried weight. Pastor Dollar's family, friends, and medical team were united in purpose to support, sustain, and guide him through this perilous moment. The man who had inspired millions was now living through one of his own most profound tests of faith, endurance, and resilience. A poignant, humbling reminder of the fragile intersection between human strength and divine providence. Signs of strain before the collapse. Insiders close to the ministry noted that Pastor Dollar's sudden collapse may have been a culmination of long-term physical strain. Weeks prior, he had canceled a major speaking engagement, officially citing scheduling conflicts. Privately, it was revealed that he was battling exhaustion and subtle health issues. For years, he had maintained an intense schedule. Weekly sermons that could last for hours, traveling to conferences and events, overseeing a complex global organization, and managing media commitments. This was not merely a pastoral role, it was a full-time operation akin to running a multinational enterprise with budgets, programs, and staff requiring constant attention. The weight of leadership, combined with age and underlying health concerns, created a perfect storm. Medical experts observing the situation noted that such chronic stress could lead to serious cardiovascular complications, diabetes-related complications, or strokes, risks that had likely been quietly accumulating for years. Ministry under pressure. World changers. Church International is not a conventional church. It is an expansive spiritual and operational enterprise. Schools, television networks, outreach programs, and international branches operate under the umbrella of its ministry. Pastor Dollar's absence immediately raised pressing questions. Who would maintain continuity? Could the ministry function without his charismatic leadership? Church leadership convened emergency meetings to discuss transparency, succession, and strategy. Opinions varied. Some elders advocated for full disclosure to maintain trust with congregants, while others feared that too much transparency could harm public perception or reduce donations. The ministry, despite its global presence, faced a stark realization. No single individual could easily replace Pastor Dollar's unique influence. The succession debate. As the crisis unfolded, discussions about potential succession quietly surfaced. Pastor Taffy Dollar, a longtime partner in ministry, emerged as a natural candidate to assume responsibilities. However, insiders acknowledged concerns about whether she could replicate her husband's larger-than-life presence. Attention also turned to associate pastors and younger leaders who had trained under Pastor Dollar. But questions remained about continuity and preserving the vision of a church so closely tied to a single individual. The scale of world changers added complexity. Its operations involved millions of dollars, international outreach, and media commitments. Leadership faced the dual challenge of maintaining stability while managing public perception. Power dynamics quietly shifted as some insiders positioned themselves in anticipation of a potential leadership vacuum, raising questions about internal politics and long-term planning. Spiritual reflections and public reactions. Outside the church, public reactions reflected a mixture of concern, speculation, and reflection. Supporters framed the incident as a test of faith and an opportunity to unite in prayer, while critics questioned whether the pressures of leading a global ministry were sustainable. Conversations emerged about the hidden cost of prosperity preaching, the culture of unrelenting expectations for spiritual leaders, and the difficulty of balancing personal health with public duty. Some observers interpreted the crisis in spiritual terms. Was it a divine interruption meant to redirect leadership? Others saw it as a human cautionary tale, illustrating the consequences of decades of non-stop labor and pressure. In either case, The moment transcended a personal health emergency, raising questions about sustainability, succession, and accountability within megachurch leadership. The legacy question. Pastor Dollar's health crisis illuminated the intersection of leadership, vulnerability, and legacy. For over 3 decades, he had shaped millions of lives through sermons, media, and outreach programs. Yet the sudden fragility of his position underscored the human cost behind the public persona. Supporters grappled with concern for his recovery, while leadership wrestled with operational continuity. The incident forced a reckoning. How does one maintain a ministry built on the image of strength when the leader is suddenly exposed as vulnerable?